Fob Lima was a miserable notch of rot carved into the jungle of Suriname, not officially acknowledged, not marked on maps, and surrounded on all sides by miles of thick, tangled forest that swallowed sound, time, and reason. The mission was officially a joint surveillance effort, monitoring illicit trafficking corridors and long-abandoned cartel routes. But everyone stationed there knew that Lima had outlived its usefulness. The satellite feed rarely updated. Comms were patchy on the best days, and the nearest real base was a 2-day trek through humid green hell. Still, command sent fresh rotation every 6 weeks, and soldiers came and went, always with a strange, quiet relief in their eyes when the helicopter finally arrived to lift them out. Staff Sergeant Tyler Hurst was on his 4th week at Lima. By then the mold had crept into the corners of his gear, and every breath of jungle air smelled like damp cloth and sweet decay. He had stopped trying to keep his boots dry, and learned to live with the damp that seeped into everything. At night, the jungle seemed to breathe just beyond the lights. Thick vines shifting in the dark, leaves brushing each other like whispers, the low, pulsing hum of frogs and insects, layered over everything like a second heartbeat. There were only 10 soldiers at Lima when he arrived. The team leader, Lieutenant Halloran, had the wiry edge of someone who hadn't slept right in weeks. "Just keep your head down, Hurst," he'd said during their first cigarette together, outside the comm shack. "This place isn't loud, but it's not quiet either. You'll see." Hurst assumed he meant the usual. Nerves, isolation, the brain playing tricks when there's nothing but darkness and heat. But as days passed, he noticed things that didn't fit. The way the radio static pulsed at irregular intervals some nights. The odd sweet scent that drifted through the outpost around 0300, like wild orchids and rainwater, out of place in the reek of mildew and sweat. The way the heat sometimes dropped suddenly, unnaturally in a matter of seconds. Then there was the incident with Corporal Alvars. Hurst had pulled midnight perimeter with him and found the guy sweating and staring into the jungle. Not out of fear. His eyes were glazed, lips slightly parted, like he was watching something beautiful. "She's out there," Alvars whispered. "She was calling my name." "Who?" Hurst asked, trying to laugh it off. Alvars didn't answer, just pointed. "She said she wanted me to follow, said she'd been waiting." He was benched the next morning. 2 days later, Alvars was gone, vanished. No tracks, no sign of a struggle, no breach in the fence, just his gear left behind, including his boots. The jungle had taken him, they said. But that night, Hurst smelled the orchids again, stronger this time, almost intoxicating. And as he lay half asleep on his cot, fighting the rising buzz in his ears, he swore he heard a woman's voice humming, a melody low and sweet, as if it was coming from just outside his tent. The next few nights blurred together. Hurst would wake with the sheets tangled around his legs, skin damp with sweat, heart racing from dreams he couldn't remember. Each time there was a lingering sensation, like someone had been there with him, someone soft and warm, fingers grazing his neck, breath at his ear. He laughed it off the first time. By the third, he stopped laughing. He told Halloran, but the lieutenant just stared at the floor. "Don't speak to her if she comes," he said quietly. "She likes to know you're listening." That night it rained. Sheets of water fell in torrents, drenching the outpost and turning the walkways into mud. Hurst lay in bed, trying to read, when the humming started again. This time it was clearer. A woman's voice, soft, teasing, drawing out syllables like silk, slipping from skin. He stood, half hypnotized, and stepped out of his tent. Rain poured down, soaking him instantly, but he didn't care. The scent of orchids was stronger than ever, thick and heady in the wet air. She was standing just past the edge of the outpost, barely visible beyond the wire. Pale skin, black hair slicked to her body by rain. Her dress, if it could be called that, clung to her like petals. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and when she smiled it wasn't comforting, it was knowing. Hurst should have called out, should have raised an alarm, but instead, he stepped forward, hands slack at his sides. The mud sucked at his boots, but he barely felt it. She lifted a hand and curled a finger, beckoning him. He blinked, and she was gone. The next morning, he told himself it was a dream, a hallucination, stress and rain and loneliness playing tricks. But the footprints were there in the mud, bare, small, leading away from the wire, then vanishing into nothing. The team medic, Rosales, approached him a few days later, said he looked pale, edgy. She'd seen it before. People get jungle fever out here, she said. Not the virus, the kind that makes you want to disappear. The jungle gets under your skin, makes you want to join it. Hurst didn't respond. He couldn't. Not when he still felt the echo of fingers on his neck each morning. Not when he started dreaming of a woman with black eyes and orchid-scented skin climbing into his bed. More soldiers started reporting things. Shadows in their tents, laughter behind the showers. Lieutenant Halloran broke one night, tried to burn the tree line with fuel, screamed that she was watching from the trees. They had to restrain him and call in a medevac. The night after he left, the orchids bloomed inside the fence. No one had planted them, but there they were, vibrant, violet, and glistening wet in the moonlight. That was the night Hurst stopped resisting. He followed the humming, shirtless and barefoot, into the jungle. The mud was warm, the vines parting for him as if they welcomed him. She appeared beside him, not walking, just suddenly there, as if the forest gave birth to her. Her body was lithe, damp with dew, and her smile was both lover and predator. She pressed a finger to his lips and whispered his name, his real name, the one he hadn't told anyone since basic. She touched his face, and his mind went white. In the morning he was found lying near the wire, skin marked with scratches and bruises shaped like kisses. He couldn't speak, could barely move. Rosales pumped him with fluids and sedatives. For 3 days he just stared at the ceiling, whispering her name under his breath. No one ever caught it clearly. When his evacuation came, Hurst didn't fight it, didn't say goodbye, just stared at the jungle from the helicopter window until it vanished beneath the clouds. Years later, long after Lima was decommissioned, he still sometimes woke drenched in sweat, the scent of orchids thick in his lungs. He tried therapy, pills, alcohol. Nothing dulled the sensation that something had been left behind in him, or worse, that something had followed him back. He never spoke about what happened at Lima, but sometimes in quiet moments he could feel her again, soft fingers on his skin, breath at his throat, and that voice, humming the same tune, always calling, always waiting. Forward Operating Base, Elbridge was a forgotten husk of war in western Iraq. Its cracked concrete buildings and pockmarked walls, a testament to a dozen rotations of American forces who had passed through since the early days of the invasion. By the time Sergeant Michael Reed arrived with Echo Company in 2009, the base was more shadow than shelter. Half the perimeter wall sagged and the barracks reeked of mildew and stale dust. But it was still functional enough to house 60 men and women, with a motor pool, a satellite tent, a small chow hut, and the towering, silent hulk of a 2-story command building that had once served as a Ba'ath Party headquarters. That building, its faded murals of Saddam Hussein still visible in places, was the center of operations, and it was where things began to feel wrong. Reed wasn't a man given to superstition. 12 years in the Army, 3 combat tours, and too many nights under fire had burned most of the nonsense out of him. He didn't care for stories about haunted foxholes or cursed bunkers, but there was something about Elbridge that clung to his skin in a way he couldn't shake. It wasn't the base itself, it was that building, the command post. From the moment he first stepped inside it, he felt like he was being watched. During the day, everything seemed normal. The intel guys ran their briefings, radio ops barked over comms, and the platoon leaders pored over maps under humming fluorescent lights. But at night, when the generators were cut and the building went dark, the atmosphere shifted. The air got colder than the desert ever allowed. Doors creaked despite no breeze, and sometimes in the upper rooms, people claimed to hear movement, soft footsteps, the shuffle of fabric, the muted sound of a woman's voice humming something wordless. It was the kind of thing most soldiers laughed off: stress, lack of sleep, imagination. Reed did too at first. But then came the Courtyard incident. It was a little after 0300 when Private Duncan, the new kid fresh out of Fort Benning, came pounding on Reed's door. His face was pale, soaked in sweat, and his rifle was clutched tight across his chest, like he wasn't sure what world he was still in. He kept saying, "She was there, in the courtyard. She was just standing there, Sarge. She looked at me. She looked right at me." Reed got him seated, got water in his hands, tried to calm him down. When Duncan finally stopped shaking, he explained that he'd been on tower watch, scanning the south wall with NVGs, when he saw a woman standing in the courtyard below. White dress, long black hair, barefoot, just staring up at him. At first he thought she was Iraqi, a civilian who had wandered in, but there had been no breach alarm, no movement on the wire, and when he blinked, she was gone. Not ran, Duncan said. Gone, like she melted into the ground. Reed reported it. Of course, procedure demanded it, but the CO brushed it off. "These kids spook easy," Captain Burns said, lighting a cigarette with one hand and waving off the report with the other. "You know how it is." But the next night, another soldier, Specialist Rowe, refused to go back into the second floor of the CP. She'd been sleeping in one of the corner rooms, and claimed she woke up to find a woman sitting at the foot of her bed. Pale skin, dark eyes, wearing what looked like a tattered wedding dress. Rowe said the woman didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. When Rowe screamed and scrambled for her flashlight, the woman wasn't there. Reed didn't know what to make of it. He wanted to write it off. Two soldiers, back to back, reporting something irrational. Maybe some shared delusion, maybe nerves. But then more stories started coming in. Private Castillo heard crying in the abandoned bathroom next to the radio room. Sergeant Cho said he found wet footprints leading down the second floor hallway, even though no one had showered in hours. Then the real turning point came. Corporal Finley went missing. They found his gear still in his bunk, his boots by the bed, his rifle untouched. He had last been assigned to overnight duty inside the CP, logging radio calls and transcribing routine reports. When they checked the logs, the last thing he wrote, scrawled hastily and far messier than his usual notes, was just 4 words: "She's here with me." After that, command took it seriously. A full search of the base turned up nothing. No signs of forced entry, no tracks leading away from the walls, no blood, no clue. Just an empty uniform and a message that felt more like a whisper from someone halfway between awake and gone. Reed started sleeping with the lights on, a habit he hadn't had since his first deployment. He moved his cot into the mess tent just to avoid the command building. But even then, the feeling of being watched didn't leave him. Sometimes at night, he'd glance toward the CP and see a faint shape in the second floor window. Always the same, a woman in white, unmoving, head tilted just slightly as if listening. He started asking around, not the army brass, but the locals, drivers, interpreters, contractors. A man named Salim, who had brought bread to the base twice a week, gave him a strange look when he asked if anything had happened in the old building. Salim wouldn't go near it, even in broad daylight. He said that years ago, before the war, the building had been used for interrogations, political prisoners, dissidents, women accused of sedition. One story, just a rumor, Salim insisted, was that a woman had been held there for weeks. She was the wife of a journalist. They accused her of hiding information, tortured her, killed her, but she never broke. They say her body was buried somewhere on the property. Reed didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in what people did to each other in places like this. Pain didn't just vanish, it left stains, echoes, and sometimes maybe those echoes had voices. The days grew heavier, equipment failed, radios went dead at strange hours. One of the medics reported seeing that same woman near the motor pool, just watching her silently. Half the platoon was ready to sleep outside the wire. Eventually, command made the call: pull out early, transfer Echo Company north. Fob Elbridge would be closed, decommissioned. They packed quickly. On the final day, Reed volunteered to do one last sweep of the CP. He told himself it was just to be thorough, but part of him wanted to see, to know, to face whatever had held that place in its grip for so long. The building was empty, dusty, quiet. He walked the halls with slow steps, stopping at the door to the corner room on the second floor. Ro's old bunk. It was cold inside, colder than it should have been. The air smelled faintly of wet earth. He scanned the room, didn't see anything out of place until he looked down. There, in the concrete near the cot, barely visible under layers of grime, was a handprint, small, feminine, pressed into the floor as if someone had leaned there, weeping. He left then, fast, locking the door behind him. Echo Company was gone by morning. The base was left to the wind and the dust and whatever still lingered inside the concrete walls. Reed never went back, but for years afterward, he'd dream of that place, of footsteps behind him in empty rooms, of a woman's voice, humming just out of reach. He never told the full story, not to friends, not even to his wife, but sometimes, late at night, he would wake with the strange sensation that someone was sitting at the edge of his bed, silent, watching. He'd reach for the light, always expecting nothing, but once, just once, he swore he saw her reflection in the glass of the bedroom window, pale face, dark eyes, waiting. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days when Corporal Davis arrived at Observation Post Echo, a lonely station nestled deep in the foothills of the Hindu Kush. The air hung thick with damp cold, the kind that seeped through uniforms and into the joints. A mist lingered low over the rocky terrain, clinging to the remnants of a Soviet-era outpost that NATO had repurposed into a forward-listening post. Davis was the newest addition to a small 4-man team assigned to monitor communications traffic from across the border. It was supposed to be a quiet post, the kind of assignment handed to soldiers nearing the end of their tour, far removed from the front lines. The post itself was little more than a rusting radio shack surrounded by ancient sandbags and a pair of floodlights that barely cut through the fog. Inside, the bunker smelled of mildew, canned meat, and unwashed uniforms. Sergeant Holloway, a career soldier with a lined face and quiet demeanor, greeted Davis with a handshake and a nod before returning to the radio station. The other two, Private Langley and Specialist Ortiz, barely looked up from their card game. The boredom here was palpable, thick as the mist outside. The first few days passed uneventfully. Davis settled into the rhythm, hourly radio checks, rotating shifts, watching the monitors, and short-range patrols that felt more like walks through haunted ruins than security sweeps. The only sound that broke the monotony was the endless hiss of static and the occasional crackle of distant chatter from radios that seemed more alive at night. That's when the atmosphere began to change. It started with Ortiz. One night, around 0200 hours, he burst into the shack pale and shaking. He'd gone out to check the perimeter and came back mumbling about a figure near the northern ridge. Said it was a woman, barefoot, dressed in some kind of white gown. Holloway dismissed it. Locals sometimes wandered too close, and the fog played tricks on the eyes. But Ortiz insisted. She was watching, he kept saying, his voice unsteady. She was smiling like she knew me. The next night, Davis took the same patrol route. He wasn't superstitious, but he felt something shift when he passed the old Soviet fuel depot, now a crumbling pile of rust and rebar. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, the silence too perfect. Then he heard it, a soft rustling, as if someone walked barefoot over gravel behind him. When he turned, there was nothing. Still, the sensation of being observed lingered, gnawing at the edges of his nerves. By the end of the week, Ortiz refused to go outside. He claimed she was standing at the tree line every night, just beyond the reach of the floodlights. Holloway grew irritated with the paranoia, but even Langley, the most level-headed of them all, admitted to hearing footsteps outside while on watch. Like someone circling the shack, he said. Never gets closer, just watching. Davis began to have dreams. They were vivid, strange, and all centered around the same theme. A woman in white, with dark, wet hair hanging over her shoulders, standing silently by the window of the bunker, her eyes locked onto his. In the dreams she never spoke, never moved, just stared. Sometimes he'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced someone had just whispered his name. Then came the night the radio picked up the voice. It was during Davis's shift. He was dozing slightly at the desk when the static cracked and a soft female voice drifted through. At first it was a whisper, unintelligible like a hum in a forgotten language. Then it grew clearer, unmistakably a woman's voice, saying his name, slowly, deliberately, almost affectionately. He called Holloway over. They replayed the segment, but the voice was gone. All that remained was static. Holloway stared at him for a long moment before turning back to his bunk, saying nothing. That night, Ortiz vanished. The team had gone to bed, leaving Davis on the late shift. When Langley woke up for his patrol, Ortiz's bunk was empty. His gear was untouched, rifle still leaning against the wall. They searched the surrounding area until morning, but found no tracks in the mud, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had stepped outside and evaporated into the fog. Command was notified, but due to weather and terrain, they couldn't send a bird for extraction or support for another 48 hours. Holloway ordered full security protocol. No one leaves the bunker alone, all watches doubled. But Davis could see the doubt in the sergeant's eyes. Something unnatural had crept into their small world, and no manual prepared them for this. The following evening, Holloway posted himself outside with his rifle, determined to face whatever had taken Ortiz. The others stayed inside, silent, listening. The radio remained off. At some point around midnight, Davis heard the sergeant muttering, not over the radio, just outside the window, his voice low and dreamlike. Langley looked at Davis and quietly unlatched his sidearm. When they finally stepped outside to check, Holloway was gone. His footprints led to the edge of the tree line and stopped. No blood, no broken branches, just an eerie, unnatural stillness. Davis and Langley sealed the door and barricaded themselves inside. The fog was thicker now, pressed against the windows like a living thing. In the early hours, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. That's when they saw her. She stood just beyond the glass, barefoot, the hem of her white dress soaked in mud, dark hair matted over her face, but her eyes were visible, wide, unblinking and focused solely on them. Langley raised his rifle and fired. The glass spider webbed with cracks, but the bullet passed cleanly through the fog. When they looked again, she was gone. Langley broke down the next day. He spoke of hearing Ortiz whispering from the vents, saying he was with her now, and it was peaceful. He claimed the woman called to him in his sleep, promising warmth, relief from the fear. That night, Davis woke to find Langley gone and the bunker door wide open, swinging in the wind. He lasted alone for 2 more nights. The radio was dead. The power flickered on and off. Every shadow looked like it might move. He stopped sleeping. On the final night he saw her again, this time inside, crouched at the foot of his cot, smiling, not malevolently, but with a soft, haunting sadness. She reached out a hand, fingers pale and damp, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream. She leaned in close, her breath cold on his neck, and whispered something he couldn't understand before vanishing into the air. When the rescue team arrived, they found Davis catatonic, curled in a corner, eyes wide and bloodshot. The bunker was untouched, no signs of struggle, no tracks in the mud, just 3 missing men and 1 survivor who never spoke of what happened, not even during the debrief. He was discharged 6 months later, medically unfit for duty. Observation post Echo was abandoned. Official reports cited mental fatigue, isolation, stress, and environmental hazards. But the locals who lived at the edge of the valley had their own explanations. They spoke of an old spirit that wandered the hills, a woman drowned in a mountain flood decades ago, who called to the lonely, the sorrowful, and the weak-hearted. She never screamed, she never ran, she simply waited, night after night, until someone looked long enough to follow, and they always followed. The fire watch rotation that night fell to Sergeant Eric Whitmore, a 10-year Army veteran currently stationed with his unit in a remote outpost in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The outpost, Fob Serpoa, was barely more than sandbags, concertina wire, and plywood tucked between jagged cliffs and dark valleys. It was the kind of place maps didn't name and satellites didn't prioritize. Days were dust and sweat. Nights were cold enough to see your breath, even in late spring. Fob Serpoa had been quiet for weeks, which made people nervous in a different way. The surrounding villages had emptied. The usual chatter over radios, insurgent movement, convoy requests, even civilian gossip, had gone silent. Whitmore remembered what Captain Tillman said just before their last patrol. It's like they packed up and moved out, like they knew something we didn't. The place was never lively to begin with, but lately, the silence was oppressive. No one could say exactly why. The nearest ANA checkpoint hadn't responded in days. UAVs picked up nothing moving in a 10-kilometer radius, which Whitmore thought felt wrong. No goats, no herders, no vehicles, just wind and dust. That night, Whitmore had the 0200-0400 fire watch. Normally a boring post, circle the perimeter, check the towers, maybe make coffee if the generator was on. But something about the cold had changed. It was too quiet. No wind, no distant gunfire, just the constant hum in his ears from being too used to noise. He checked the radio in the command shack before heading out. Fob Serpoa, this is Watchtower Alpha. Radio check. Over. Nothing. He repeated it. Still nothing. Probably a dead battery or bad signal bounce. It happened. Still, his unease thickened. The outpost perimeter wasn't big, just a few hundred meters across. He took the northern path first, past Tower 2. The soldier up there, PFC Harper, was sitting with his NVGs pulled down, chewing sunflower seeds. They nodded to each other without words. Harper looked pale. Whitmore asked if he was good. Harper didn't respond right away. Then he said, "I thought I saw something earlier, just a shadow, out past the wire." "What kind of shadow?" "Like something tall, on two legs, but it moved wrong. Fast, like wrong kind of fast." Whitmore frowned. "Animal, didn't move like one." "You reported." Harper hesitated. "Didn't see it long enough." Whitmore didn't push him, just gave a nod and moved on, his boots crunching lightly in the gravel. It was probably a tree catching moonlight, or a figment from a tired brain. Night shifts mess with perception. Still, he found himself gripping his rifle tighter. The southern fence line ran along a steep ravine, about 30 feet deep. No one liked patrolling it, not because of enemy fire, but because it always felt off. Soldiers joked it was cursed, but no one ever explained why. As he neared it, Whitmore noticed something unusual. The air had that smell, dry, metallic, faintly like ozone, like the air before a thunderstorm. But there were no clouds. Moonlight was clear as ever. Then he saw it. On the edge of the ravine, just beyond the wire, something stood motionless, not crouched, not hiding, standing, tall, lean, human-shaped, but slightly off in proportion. Whitmore's breath caught in his throat. He didn't raise his weapon right away. Instead, he blinked hard. When he looked again, it was gone. No movement, no sound, just empty space. His rational mind fought to kick in. It could have been a bush casting a long shadow, a hallucination even. He hadn't slept much in days, but something instinctual in his body knew better. He backed away slowly and radioed the TOC. Still nothing. He circled back to the barracks. Inside, the generator lights flickered once, then held steady. He woke Corporal Ramos, his backup on shift, told him something didn't feel right. Ramos didn't question him. He just geared up and followed. Together they checked Tower 3, but the post was empty. No sign of the guard, Lance Corporal Jetson. His weapon was still there, resting on the sandbag wall. NVGs were missing. Radio was dead. Ramos muttered. Where the hell would he go without his rifle? Whitmore didn't answer. They called his name, scanned the perimeter, even ventured just outside the wire. Nothing. No footprints in the dust, no noise, just absence. Back at the TOC, Whitmore woke Lieutenant Greaves, their ranking officer for the night. Greaves didn't take it well. His first assumption was desertion or a kidnapping, but there was no breach, no sign of struggle, no tire tracks. It was like Jedson vanished into thin air. At dawn, the search widened. They combed the ravine, sent a recon drone out, and radioed nearby units. No contact. Harper from Tower 2 was relieved and immediately reported sick. Claimed he felt cold to the bone and couldn't stop shaking. Medics found nothing wrong. Then came the tapes. The TOC had night vision cameras pointed at the wire. Whitmore, Greaves, and the intelligence guy, Warrant Officer Marks, watched the feed from the hours Jedson had been posted. For most of it, he stood still, paced, occasionally sat. Then at 0317, the footage glitched, only for a second. When it returned, Jedson was standing bolt upright, facing the ravine, not moving. Then slowly he started walking forward, deliberate steps. He dropped his rifle behind him, and just before he reached the edge of the wire, he paused. Then some blur, entered frame. It didn't look like a person. It didn't look like anything they could clearly define. A shimmer in the shape of a man, but not quite. Jedson didn't scream. He didn't run. He simply tilted his head to the side, like listening to something, then walked beyond the wire and vanished from the camera's view. The others stared in stunned silence. Could be a cloak, Marks offered. Could be tech that walks people off base without a struggle, Greaves asked. They pulled all personnel into the courtyard at 0900, told them what they had to one soldier unaccounted for, search ongoing. No mention of what was on the tape. For the next 2 nights, no one slept easy. Multiple soldiers reported hearing something outside the walls, footsteps where no one should be. One swore he heard his own name, whispered from beyond the wire. 2 others claimed to see movement near the ravine, but refused to elaborate. Then Ramos disappeared, just like Jedson, rifle left behind. No sign of forced exit, no alerts triggered. Whitmore took it personally. Ramos had been his backup, his responsibility. But more than that, it meant whatever was out there wasn't finished. He rewatched the tapes again and again, trying to find something, anything that explained what was happening. But the same glitch, the same movement, the same blank silence, afterward repeated each time. On the 3rd night, Greaves authorized full lockdown. No one outside, no solo watches, doubled tower teams, weapons loaded. That night, Whitmore was paired with Specialist Dean in Tower 1. Dean was quiet, fresh out of training, eyes wide the whole time. At around 0340, they both saw it. Not clearly, but enough. A tall figure standing out in the open near the ravine, not moving, not hiding, just watching. Dean whispered, "Is that?" Whitmore raised his rifle, but didn't fire. There was a part of him, deep and ancient, that told him not to. The figure didn't come closer, but it didn't leave either. Then Dean spoke again, only it wasn't quite right. He said, "I think I know him." And before Whitmore could stop him, Dean stepped down from the tower. Whitmore called after him, shouted, even aimed his rifle. But Dean kept walking, calm, steady toward the wire. He reached the edge and stopped. The figure vanished. Dean collapsed. Whitmore raced down. Dean was convulsing, eyes rolled back. They evacuated him to Bagram the next morning. Final diagnosis, seizure, temporary psychotic break. He never returned to Serpoa. Within a week, Fob Serpoa was decommissioned. Command cited logistical redundancy. Troops were reassigned. Whitmore was transferred to another outpost in Helmand. No one talked about what really happened. It was one of those things filed away under unexplained incidents, buried beneath bureaucracy and silence. Years later, back home, Whitmore sometimes dreamed of the ravine, of standing figures, of the sound barely audible, of something whispering his name. He never spoke to anyone from Serpoa again. He never went near mountains. And when people asked why he always double-locked his doors at night, he simply said, "Old habit from deployment." But in truth, he locked them not to keep something out. He locked them because something had followed him back.
If you liked the video, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this.